Hello and welcome to Practical Ideas for Growth. I'm Sarah Dobick, and today we have Ty Hendrickson on our team back.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this.
Yes, today we are talking about leveraging year-end planning meetings and talking about the importance of those as we are in the deep into fourth quarter of the year. A lot of times we talk about these for cross-selling, right? But you and I were just having a conversation about this that most firms don't necessarily need more work, but these are still really critical things to hold, whether you need new work or not, in order to protect your client relationships.
Yeah, sometimes, things come up at the end of the year that, whether or not you're looking for work, it's important. It's important, ideas that come up from the client, or important issues that come up that, you really have to be able to, work with them on those issues and make sure that they're getting everything they need. Because if they're not getting it from you, they're going to get it from somebody else.
Absolutely. And we had a great example of that come up this week with a client that, we had a very particular initiative outlined for some year-end stuff. We got into the meeting and, it totally pivoted. And, out of pure curiosity, I said, help me understand this because we were going down this direction less than 30 days ago. And, something happened. And the viewpoint was like, it may impact a smaller number of clients, but it also could add a ton of value to their organizations. And so we felt strongly that this had to come from us and we needed to have that conversation with them as opposed to this other conversation. And they'll probably end up having both, but it made sense and it was all out of protection for their client relationships and adding value to those.
Yeah, I think there is so many opportunities that's even beyond just, the services and everything that you're doing for the clients. I think there's also an internal purpose to these, and I mentioned that to you earlier, that we really have to focus on client service. And it's easy when you own the relationship, right? When it's someone that I've worked hard to bring in and I spend a lot of time with, I want to give good service and I want to focus on that. But some of our younger staff, it's just numbers to them, right? Like the work comes in, they crunch the numbers, and it's hard to think about service when you don't see that as a real person. And so having these meetings at the end of the year is a great opportunity to bring in these younger staff and let them, put a face to the name, get to have these conversations, develop some relationships. They might have a perspective you don't know about, but it's about giving them these opportunities to build confidence and embrace that client service mindset too.
Yeah, and I love that too because so many of our staff want to feel tied to their work and it's really hard to do that when you don't know the people behind the work that you're doing, right? And there's a connection to that purpose, something so small like being involved in a meeting and hearing the story from the individual about how they built or grew their business or their family or whatever that context is, assuming you're having the right conversation in your
Yep.
year-end meeting
Yep.
can really add a lot of value to not only getting them in that mindset, but also giving them purpose. And that goes to retention, right? And keeping people engaged.
Yeah, and one of the things that somebody brought up today in a conversation, which I think was very timely, was you're talking about the right things and making sure you're driving the conversation in the right direction and providing service. Well, one of the things that this firm does is, in order to get the younger staff involved, because they are so heavily involved in the day-to-day work of the client, they have them put together the agendas for these year-end planning meetings. And so they contribute in that way and they start to feel like they're part of it. And then that gives them the chance to have a say in what happens and what's discussed too, right?
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love giving them ownership for doing some of that thinking to go through it. What are some of the things that, you know, they should be focused on, right? A lot of times if you've got staff, it's very technical. And I
Yeah.
think the purpose to get to the real meat of a good conversation with the client, yes, there's sometimes things we have to cover that are technical with them and we should come with ideas, but there's other conversations that are probably more valuable to be having with clients too.
It's those open conversations, open-ended questions, right? this is a time when you're forward thinking and you're trying to get them to think about the future, let you in on it and all that kind of stuff. It's a great time to build trust and build those relationships. So you can ask things that are a little more broad than you normally would if you're sitting down and be like, okay, we've got to finish this audit. I've got to have X, Y, and Z, and we've got to do these 10 things. And so you have a very specific agenda of what you need to do to finish the work. Well, on the flip side, for these planning meetings or for these non-engagement related meetings, it really is about going broad, and it's about asking, what went well this year? What didn't go well? What are you guys looking at next year? What's changed? And digging into those big, broad questions that allow them to kind of think outside of the normal engagements that you're working on. I think that's probably where you were going with that, right?
100%. I love the, what's going well, what's not going well with their business. I also always like to ask them, like, what do you want to accomplish next year? Like, I actually don't think we ask our business owners or our families that we're serving, like, what's that one thing? What's the goal for next year? What's on your mind related to some of that? And it can give you so much insight instead of just getting tactical. Because I think sometimes we think about, like, oh, this conversation is about what I can do for them. Like, and if I can't do it, then there's no way I can talk about it, right? So I'm not a expert in a name it. So why would I bring that up? Why would I even ask what their concerns are? And part of, I think, adding value to the client relationship is being able to have that conversation. That's that business advisory thing that every accountant that I talk to wants to be doing more of. Yet we don't always open the conversation to some of those things.
Yeah. And one of my favorite questions, and this just totally triggered it in my mind, what's your goal? What do you want to accomplish? My favorite question that I use even when I'm coaching, right, with anybody is, what's the one thing that would make next year a success? And you kind of have them visualize what that is. And then you can back into how you can help them accomplish that. Because sometimes goals can be lofty, but like, if you end up next year, what makes that year a success? And so that, to me, is probably one of my favorite questions to ask to try to back into to how you can help somebody.
Yeah. The other question I really like, and I've got to steal this from my friend, I think it was my friend Mark that gave it to me. But he said, we always ask, like, how did we add value for you this year? Right. And understanding from the client's perspective how what you are doing adds value, I think, is such an invaluable thing to understand about the work. It's every time I ask this question, it's the smallest things that have the biggest impact. They'll be like, yeah, this one time I was like really having a hard time finding X, Y, or Z. And so sent me a book on this topic because they were reading it and it addressed that one thing that I was challenged with. And it just like floors me that, like, that's the value. That's the thing the client thinks about. And it could have been years ago, right, that they did this. That's the value point that the client sees. It's not like all these other services that we provide. And maybe they also get value out of that, but that's what's stuck in their mind. And that was an example from a client interview we did. And I was just like, oh, wow, what a small thing made such a big impact for this one client that they valued.
It is so eye-opening to hear what people value, because it's like you said, it's so different usually than what you think it is. It's like all these hours and things that we did, and a lot of times it's a feeling that they had. It's it's more than the deliverable or what you've done physically. It's a feeling that they had. And I go back to the fact that, again, this is such a great training opportunity, that what better way for your younger staff or people that you're trying to embrace, client service and client ownership, to hear from the proverbial horse's mouth, I guess, if you will, that, what it is that they value from you. And I take it even a step further and maybe, ask them to ask that question, right? And giving them some exposure. A lot of people say, oh, I'll let them listen, I'll let them shadow, and they don't ever say anything, and it's fine. And I even had someone say today, I said it on a bunch of these meetings, and that's how I learned. I never said anything. And I'm sure those people were going, why am I paying to have that guy in here? But I said, well, maybe in the future, when you're training someone, give them one question to ask, prep them, right? Because if you don't prep them, they're not really going to know what to say. But what a better question to ask than say, hey, why don't you ask the client, as I'm getting to work on your stuff, as I'm getting to know you guys, what is it that you really value about working with us? What value did we bring to you? And that's such a fun question for them to ask, and an easy one that I think you could pass off to someone shadowing you in a meeting.
Absolutely. And I love that, in addition to creating the agenda, have some of the questions, the prompting questions, right? We can't script an entire conversation, but you can look at the people and say, I want you to cover this part of the agenda. And so why don't you come up with some questions that will get the conversation going, right? And then some scenarios. And if there's things that you feel like you might be uncomfortable with, we always say come up with a code word. So somebody's like, I don't know, Ty, what do you think?
We just talked about that today. That's my out. Anybody that's in a meeting with me and they know that if they hear somebody in a meeting with me go, that's interesting. Ty, what do you think? That's them going, I have no clue how to answer this, and I want you to take over. So those code words are perfect.
Yeah. The other thing I really like to cover in these year-end meetings, because we don't ask enough and we certainly don't survey our clients very often, is just I do keep, stop, start. What do you want us to keep doing, stop doing, start doing? And, it's either validation that what you're doing is great, or there could be like this really minor thing that's having an impact that we had no idea. And not everybody's willing to tell you to your face. So that's where surveys can be beneficial. But I think it shows your commitment to the relationship. And it's really funny when we ask that question, a lot of times the clients will go, well, what about us? Is there anything we could be doing? What do you think? And so that leads an opportunity to say, well, like, it always takes a couple emails to get a response. Like, is there a better way for us to be communicating? What do you think? Right. Or figuring out a solution to something, right? That's like, I struggle reading my emails. If you could just text me, I would be so much more responsive. Cool. We can totally do that. Within reason. We can't text an entire like detailed email, but I really find it, beneficial to have those conversations as well.
Yeah, and it makes it nice when you have a good enough relationship that you can ask a question like keep, stop, start, and it be an honest feedback conversation. So many people go into these year-end meetings, and I know we talk about cross-selling, and the problem is, though, some people get so in their mind that I got to go in there and find an opportunity, and I'm going to bring something up, and I'm going to sell another service on the call or on that conversation, that the meeting takes on a different feeling, right? And you don't always get the good information from someone if they feel like you're looking for an opportunity or feel like you're trying to find something to sell them. And so there's a fine line in some of these year-end planning meetings that even if you go into it hoping for a new opportunity, how you approach that and how you have those conversations makes a difference in what the outcome is, for sure.
Yeah, it really does. And the goal of these isn't, you will naturally identify opportunities and problems to solve for your clients. You will do it. But if you go into it thinking this is only about cross-selling, right, then, it's a totally different perspective. And I think for most of our clients, that's not the end goal. Yeah. The service, the adding value is really the end goal around most of this.
Yeah, there's one managing partner we work with, and he always makes me laugh because he says, Ty, every time I go to a meeting, I leave with more work. He was like, I don't understand, and he goes, it's just easy. And I go, well, it's easy for you because you just know how to ask the questions, but that's the right mindset to have. You just go in, you have a conversation, and you just find out what's going on with them, right? And you don't overcomplicate it. You don't make it a sales situation. You don't make it some sort of pushy thing. It's just a conversation. And I think that's where people open up a lot more, is when they feel like you're coming from a genuine place of interest.
Absolutely. Well, I know we only have a couple of minutes left, but I know one of the top questions we get about this is like, I can't meet with everybody. And it's true, accounting firms have way too many clients, way more than they should at some level, but we can't meet with all of our clients. So who should we be meeting with at year-end if we only have a limited amount of time?
I think there's a couple ways to approach this. Obviously any of your top clients, right? You need to make sure you're meeting with them. You need to have FaceTime with them. If you have needy clients, you need to make sure you're meeting with them. You got to have FaceTime with them. If you have a lot of opportunity or white space with a certain client, meet with them, right? It's just kind of good to stay in front of them. But one of the approaches a lot of the firms I work with are taking is they're sending emails to all their clients and saying, hey, I know it's the end of the year, things are coming up. I wanted to just reach out and see if there was anything on your mind, if there was anything we need to talk about before year end, or anything that, has changed. If you want to find a time, here's a link to my calendar. Let me know. Let me know if you'd like to find a time to talk. I'd be happy to go over anything. And so it kind of balances that to where you're saying, look, hey, I'm thinking about you. I don't really have time to meet with everybody, so I'm going to need you to raise your hand. But it still shows that interest, and it puts the ball in their court. And they may just be like, oh, no, thanks for thinking of me. Everything is all good. I'll send you my stuff in January or April 10th. But, whatever, either way.
Absolutely. Well, I do think that that's really important for them to raise their hand and just to be proactive about like initiating those meetings. I know CECs are playing a really big role for firms that have those right now in really reaching out to the clients. And some of them are part of packages, right? Like we meet with you at the end of the year. And so depending on how formal it is, I think there's a lot of opportunity. But I love that you describe, needy clients, the ones where there's some opportunity, white space. Like we definitely want to make some effort with some of those people. And keep in mind, you as partners don't have to do all the meetings, right?
Yeah.
You can tier it and ask some of your folks to do some of those year-end meetings too. So, well, we are at time. This was a fantastic conversation, and I'm sure we could keep going. But thank you to all of our listeners who tuned in today. We really appreciate you. And we'll be back soon in a couple weeks.
Thanks.